We have finished another year of Nintendo Power Magazine, and as is our tradition on the show, after finishing a year of the magazine, we take a look at the games on Nintendo platforms that made their respective top whatever lists, but weren't featured in the magazine, our best of the rest. That said, because Nintendo Power shifted from a top 30 for the NES and the top 10 for the Game Boy to each platform getting a top 20, and also combined with the fact that we had a new platform launch towards the end of this year of the magazine, of Volume 4 of Nintendo Power, we have a lot of games to cover. Specifically, we have 6 games each for the NES and the Game Boy, which is par for the NES and brings the Game Boy to being on par with the NES, and 15 titles for the Super Nintendo. Now, my initial plan was to do one episode for each platform, but with the raw number of titles on deck for the Super Nintendo, I am going to have to do 2 episodes for that system, at least on this outing. So, the best of the rest for Nintendo Power Volume 4 will take up the next 4 episodes of this show. With that little announcement and business out of the way, let's get started with the best of the rest for the Nintendo Entertainment System for Volume 4 of Nintendo Power. First up is Double Dragon 3. Wow, what a hell of a way to start this episode. The first 2 Double Dragon games were home console ports of some of the first quarter-munching brawlers, with simplistic controls based around beating the crap of your opponents while trying to manage their position on screen so you don't get double-teamed. They were very hard, and that was mainly due to the fact that these were adaptations of games designed to take a lot of your money. This didn't excuse the balance of those games necessarily, but it does explain it, and ultimately I think they were fairly decent ports because the hardware limitations prevented you from getting too overwhelmed at one time. I cannot, however, understand the balance of Double Dragon 3 because this is a game that was made specifically for home consoles. Yes, there's an arcade game called Double Dragon 3 that's out there, but this isn't a port of that game. They were designed in parallel. And this version is specifically designed for a home release and thus has as much in common with the arcade title as the NES and arcade versions of Strider have to do with each other. This game's problems, though, can be described in brief. You have 1 life and 0 continues. Well, let's compare this to other games where you had 3 to 4 lives and 3 to 4 continues. This gives you, at most, 24 or 16, rather, chances to get through the game. It's not a lot, but it does require you to get good at the game to beat it, and it gives you a chance to learn. Double Dragon 3, on the other hand, is a game designed specifically to require you to beat the game with 1 life and 1 life only. Yes, there are continue codes you can enter once you hit levels 3 and 4 to let you continue there, but that's it. What the hell, man? I can only recommend playing this game if you have a NES Game Genie, or playing on a console like the Retron 5, which has a cheat device built into the system, allowing you to enable a cheat for infinite health, because it's really not worth it otherwise. Next up is Ultima IV, Quest of the Avatar. Ultima IV is significantly more interesting. The world of the game doesn't have the same amount of detail to it that the PC version of the game does, but a lot of the ideas are still there, even if the hardware limitations of the NES and some of the content restrictions that Nintendo imposes on their developers makes it a little more difficult to realize those concepts. It's still a very non-linear RPG where you're talking to everyone, writing down clues, and ultimately being able to take on the game's goals of mastering each of the 8 virtues in almost any order. That said, this game is not without its issues. With Exodus, you built a party, and had that party from the very beginning, whereas here you start off alone and have to recruit party members. And it's not exactly made clear what steps you have to take to recruit those party members. That's something that requires investigation by you, the player, and that sort of thing. It's still handled very well, but it's definitely something where if you don't know that you're putting together the band from the very beginning, it can be a little off-putting. That said, the PC version of Ultima IV is still completely free on GOG and will run on pretty much anything because it's running in DOSBox. So Linux, Mac, PC, any version of Windows, you're good. So unless you specifically want the NES version, which I will still say is not a bad port, the home computer version is certainly the cheaper option. In fact, I would say the cheapest option. Moving on, we come to Bandit Kings of Ancient China. When I was putting this list together, I thought this was going to be a candidate for Game of the Issue, as it's basically sort of a prequel to Romance of the Three Kingdoms, adapting Chinese historical novel Outlaws of the Water Margin to video game consoles in the same way that Romance of the Three Kingdoms adapted that book. However, with Romance of the Three Kingdoms and Nobunaga's ambition and so on, you have a nest egg at the start of the game. You have a chunk of the world map that is your home base, which has some troops, a source of income, and a population that you can use to build an army and take from there to take on all your enemies. With this, on the other hand, you don't really have this here. You start off on your own, and you don't even have any cash to your name, unless Bandit Kings of Ancient China has some sort of weird copy protection thing, where if you're not playing a legit cartridge on a standard NES, you can't make any money. But if that's the case, then that's another point against this game, because this means this is a game that is unplayable on any Famiclones or NES Retro clones or the Retron 5 or anything like that, which limits the playability for modern gamers, because in a lot of ways it is less expensive to get a Famiclone than it is to get a straight-up NES, and it'll be easier to hook up that Famiclone to your television, to your modern HD flat-screen television, than it is to hunt down an additional CRT or an older television that has the right inputs. Next up comes Caveman games. Caveman games is basically a parody of track and field games. Now, this is a genre that on home consoles is hard to get right anyway, and Caveman games doesn't fare much better than other games like California games as far as gameplay is concerned. It does make up for this by having a lot of character in the game animations and some really funny animations when you fail, which makes up for things a lot. However, much like other games in the genre, this is a title that is more fun played with friends, and possibly after a few beers, than solo. Not because it's funnier if you're drunk, but because if you're slightly inebriated, it affects your manual dexterity and you'll actually play a little worse. Maybe. I don't know. Our penultimate game for the NES is Base Wars. Now, I've historically said that baseball games on the NES have not been great due to the fact that the majority of games in this genre do not give you a really good camera angle to handle pop flies or general fielding in the outfield. The MLB baseball game I reviewed earlier from LJN fixed this with a radically different camera angle and a control scheme that's different from most other baseball games. The camera angle made things a lot better. The control scheme required some learning, but otherwise it was fine. Base Wars, on the other hand, uses the same camera perspective and, for that matter, control scheme that everyone from RBI Baseball to Bases Loaded has used, which means that all the fundamental underlying issues with the camera perspective and the controls remains. That said, there are parts of this which I really like. In particular, I like that when you go to tag a player out, your fielder and the runner duke it out to see who makes it to the base, and because both sides are robots, things can get more brutal. It's almost a baseball version of Blood Bowl, which makes me wish that there was a actual baseball version of Blood Bowl, or equivalent thereof. Wrapping things up for this issue is Kings of the Beach. Kings of the Beach is kind of a weird game. I mean, it is a beach volleyball game. It doesn't have any unique visual style to it, and it controls about as well as the other beach volleyball games I've played thus far. However, the weird bit is you only control one of the two players on your team, with you handling that players' serves, sets, and bumps and spikes. However, you can set up shots on your own, and the other character is controlled completely by the computer. But depending on where you are when the ball gets into position, the game will kind of move you into being in the right spot to make it the shots, so you just have to time the button presses. However, because you don't control the other player on the field, you will sometimes end up with rubber banding, where you'll get a good lead on the opposing team, and then your other player will drop the ball a few times, no pun intended, and allow them to catch up some. So it can be somewhat frustrating. For my pick of the best of the rest for the NES, I am going with Ultima IV. As mentioned, the PC version of this game is available legally for free from GOG, and runs on pretty much everything because it's a DOS game and they've got it set up with DOSBox. However, the NES version still is pretty good, and it is a simpler game in certain aspects, particularly compared to the PC version. Next time, we're moving on to the best of the rest for the Game Boy. Now, if you like this episode, please like this video and subscribe to be notified when future episodes come out. If you want to help support the show, please toss a little money to the show, either by supporting monthly via my Patreon, link is up here, or toss some money in the tip jar for one-time payment. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.